Hello, welcome to week 3 and video 2 of the Rhetoric Reviewed podcast. So today's a bit of a special video actually, where we're going to be going over a comment that someone left on a previous video that I thought was really interesting. I might do this more or less often, depending on what we get for this video and the future ones. So, first and foremost, we're going to be going over the order versus truth video, which is Has Science Come Too Far? And from that, discussing a comment that someone left and trying to give some responses. In each of my videos, any comment you leave, I will respond to, because, stress testing my ideas and such. So we're going to first go over what the order versus truth video discussed. So this video, which I think was the fourth one of our series, discussed whether or not science has come too far, or whether or not it has upset the balance of religion and science in impacting people's lives. So in that video, I made the argument that that because both science and religion or religious ideologies come from two different standpoints. Religion is faith-based and science is procedure-based. Science, you must see something or you must observe something and then make an analysis. Whereas for religion, it's mostly faith-based, where, you believe in things whether or not there's physical evidence. And that's one of the pillars of what makes each of these ideologies work. It's what makes them function. But the thing is that these two ideologies, their fundamentals, are not exactly compatible always when stretched to their final endpoint. For example, if you try to find proof for religious things, you're not going to find, evidence of God's hand and everything, in an observable way. Just like how if you try to apply faith to science, you're going to get things that aren't true, right? If you just believe something's out there, that doesn't actually add anything to the pursuit of, worldly truths that you're trying to find in science. So in that video, I think what happened was I did give more credence to religion than I should have in comparison to science. I mean, the reason I did that is, of course, because science is the world religion now. No matter where you go, even the Catholic Church accepts things of science. I believe Pope Francis has a master's in chemistry, I believe it is. But the point is, I don't think I did enough. So this comment from, I'm not going to try to say that. If science wouldn't have come too far, you wouldn't be able to record the video. Do you prefer blind religious order to life extension, space inhabiting, and societal development? So that's a fair point. So this is weighing, right? If you, for example, were able to go back in time and change something, would you rather have a society where maybe it's more socially cohesive, or would you have something where you have better, like this commenter says, life extension, space inhabiting, and societal development? So I mentioned briefly in the comment, my response here, that of course, there's so much good done by science, and I don't think I really got into that enough in the video. And we discussed multiple times throughout the last few videos, medicine, right? You have technology for statistics. You have, the ability to actually bureaucratize government and make things work across countries, nations, states, counties, whatever. So it's so much more efficient now to not only live life, but to have, food security, health care, easy access to information, and all of these things that improve your quality of life. And in response to that, this commenter says, has any religion's great promise to humanity ever been fulfilled? Is it phantom hopes that make society function and thrive? I can't fathom why people demand God to be human. God doesn't add any additional value, even as proxy. So I don't know, I'm gonna go backwards here. So first he says that he can't fathom why people, I assume it's a he at least, demand God to be human. This would vary from religion to religion, but ultimately the last thing he says, that, God doesn't add any additional value, even as proxy, is untrue, because a lot of things that we interact with, we treat as a proxy for God, or the proxy for a higher figure of power. So you might be secular and you might think that's not true, but if you're a secularist, you believe in the procedural equivalent of, priests, bishops, cardinals in Catholicism, and, rabbis in Judaism and such. You believe in the science, which is the authority, the pursuit of truth, and that's the figure you worship. And just how I think it is interesting to discuss how some religions have made a God a more human, personal, a personal being. But regardless, the fact is that humans have a evolutionary need to not worship, but to have a certain story that rallies people around one thing. And the easiest way that's always been done is connecting people through a shared story or myth, which almost always revolves around one or a set of gods. So it is not a part of, it's not phantom hopes like this commenter says that makes society function and thrive, but it's the very existence of a unifying story that makes society function and thrive. Because societies weren't originally built off of, group benevolence for others, because that no such thing exists. Humans are tribal in nature, so in order to bring together a large amount of people, you're going to have something that doesn't break apart individual parts, right? Because that's not only destructive, it's antithetical to unifying, but you need something else to unify. For example, if you want to bring together all these different these different sects of Protestantism in early America, because each state or each colony was a different group of sect of Christians. If you want to bring those people together who are previously fighting, you're going to need something, a unifying vision. And as America secularized, that became the American nation, the Constitution, right? The Bill of Rights. All of these things brought together these people, and that serves as our society, as America, the nation's fundamental, God or worship. We love we call equality freedom, just like how someone who's mainly religious might value God more, for example. And then the final thing this commenter says is, has any religion's great promise to humanity ever been fulfilled? I think this is a really interesting question, and is what really separates apart ideologies and religions, which are two different things. Religion doesn't claim to be scientific. You might try to do so, and you might hear a lot of advocates saying there's evidence for certain parts of a religious book, but that's, as we discussed in the last video, or the Order vs. Truth video, that's antithetical to religious ideology, because religion is based on the fact that you don't need evidence. Supplementary evidence would be nice, but it's not actually necessary for the point of the religion to be proven or to be disseminated. And that's what this comes down to. So ideologies, like the more secular modern ones, like Nazism, Stalinism, Maoism, communism in general, I guess, right? These are secular ideologies that have a certain promise. They claim to be scientific, that they understand the human condition, and therefore they have the best solution for it, right? For example, communism claimed to understand the human relations between power relations, right? And then they chose to make, well, at least there was a positing of an idea of how to fix that, right? And that would create utopia, as Karl Marx famously said. And everyone after that. Same thing with Nazism. As much as people treat it as non-secular, it was absolutely a product of blind science. Really, it was a product of Hitler not scapegoating on purpose, but truly believing that these certain groups were the problems, right? Whether it be like Jews, Gypsies, Slavs, whatever, right? And that's what represents secular religion. Whether or not it's actually true, they claim to come from a proven standpoint that has backing. Meanwhile, religions famously don't have that element. They don't promise utopia. They promise, at least in the real world, right? In the real world, part of the whole thing is that life is unfair, and it's going to be unfair. But by doing certain things, you're going to be able to find eternal peace in, heaven, or I don't know, Valhalla, whatever it is. There's solutions for the afterlife, and that's what it promises. And that's the fundamental difference, right? Religion doesn't have a great promise to humanity. It doesn't promise to fix lives, right? Of course, it improves lives by helping the general societal there's trust between others and such, but it doesn't actually promise material wealth necessarily. So I just thought that was an interesting comment that I thought I would respond to in video form. But let's go out and finish wrapping up the Order vs. Truth video and parts I wish I would have said. So, and I guess before I get to that, I do want to reflect on the YouTube algorithm. So I made a few videos, now it's week 3, but in this process, I've discovered things that work and don't work with the algorithm. And I think the most popular video I have right now, as of whatever April 1st, is the tolerance video, right? Does tolerance kill societies? And I think the YouTube algorithm is interesting because it really does push, as many have said, more engaging, controversial content. While I don't think anything in that video is particularly controversial, except for maybe some analogies, right? The point I was overall making was that, so some societies, fundamentally, when their fundamentals are changed, have either the ability to die or be revived in a different form. Because if the fundamentals are so core to that society, right, then changing it makes the society not what it was. Anyways, I think the title of that is just, I guess, more controversial, right? How tolerance kills societies, because tolerance we see as a good thing, and I probably do as well. But I just think it's interesting how the YouTube algorithm is more likely to push something like that than something recent I've made, like such should politicians be punished for lying, which watch the video to find out. Oh, anyways, the point is, let's go into yeah, the algorithm's weird. We know this. So the dead world. So what are the psychological effects of the dead world? So this is an extension of my secularism point. What does knowing give us? What does truth give us? Order versus truth. So truth, these aren't, not necessarily these are antithetical ideas, but they serve different purposes and achieve different ends when it comes to human society. So when it comes to truth, when it comes to like science, when it comes to, at least, wow, when it comes to being spewed out of my mouth right there, biology, astronomy, and to a certain degree physics, right? You find that there's a lot of things you discover that makes the world cold and dead. Humans aren't this magical creation of God, or or a unique figure that we don't even think about being. That we are human, and that is inherently good. Suddenly, we are just a bag of meat and neurons firing in our brain. The world is no longer wonderful. It's a bunch of animals we can classify easily, which have certain habits, that have certain things, which are also just a lump of meat. Biomes, right? The continents are not special. They are not beautiful. They are simply tectonic plates unfeelingly moving against each other. And by all means, this has advanced our progress of technology a lot. I want to stress that again, right? We have better earthquake detection now. We can do better. We can utilize animal, like venoms, for example, for antidotes, right? We can understand the human psychology better and see what works better, even though we're not really good at applying these things, right? And the question I have is, does knowing these things make us happier? Does knowing that the universe is cold, dead, empty, make our lives more fulfilled? Does it fill us with purpose? And I would say it's actually on the contrary. It doesn't really do so. And for myself, and at least people I've spoken to in the general, collective pathos of our civilization, it doesn't seem to be the case. Earth is figured out for the most part, except for the deep sea, which is more terrifyingly far away when it comes to the accessibility we have to it. But there doesn't seem to be that same wonder people have with the universe as times past may have had. And this is, I think, mainly because some information has become so, out there. I think especially this applies to astronomy. So I had a few years ago a very strong astronomy phase, and I was, I took a course with, for Johns Hopkins, for example, so I kept going. And the more you learn about space and the more information there is out there, the more you realize that the timeline and scale of things isn't conducive to human psychology very well, because we can't not only grasp the size of the universe, it just makes you feel insignificant, and it removes the purpose element of life, right? You always hear this thing with, at least, more nihilistic people, but it's like, what's the point of life when I'm just this, a speck in the cosmos soup, right, in the universe? And I think inadvertently what's happened, I'm not trying to roll back on this, but the pursuit of truth has let us get away from what makes life stable, what makes being stable. It was initially that we dreamed of the constellations of an afterlife, and this filled us with purpose to a certain degree, despite the hardships of the real world, because you believed that more or less, if you did the right things here, you'd be promised eternal bliss in the future, right, in Western philosophy. And while we see that as definitely not rational, or at least in a scientific way, right, it had its utility. It definitely had its utility, and you're gonna find that even today, religious people are more happy on mass because they have a separate a purpose, sense of happiness that is separate from like, for example, materialism, right? And what this does is it generates less net hope in society, and this is destructive because over time this builds up and society becomes less active, less maybe procreation becomes more difficult, people interact socially less, and there's less wonder and adventure in the world for people to pursue because of how atomized we are in urbanized areas. So we've already discussed multiple times in previous videos what urbanization does to humans, but it's even more evidence given the conditions that we've seen here, where not only are we in these psychological death traps in these urban areas, referred to the overpopulated video, but we're also going through this phase of nihilism as a society as a whole, where we find out the world doesn't have meaning and we have nothing to replace it because we already killed off certain like parts of religion and deep religious connection from young ages. And that's sort of what modern day has turned into, right? You know, stuff like exploring space makes sense relative to the universe, but really, what does it do for the average person? We find out all of these things about that's going on out there, and what does this give us? What does certain knowledge actually give us? And I think that's one of the things that we also understand for stuff like aliens. Let's say aliens did exist, and let's say indeed the government was hiding them from us, or at least knew about it. The best choice would probably be to hide that information because of the damage it could do, how much damage the truth can do. So unless, like, if I don't want to, I sound like a conspiracy theorist now, but if aliens were to come, in my opinion, there would probably be a select group of people who deal with them while protecting the world from the actual truth, because that truth would be too hard to bear. So, and that would be an example of choosing order over truth. And yeah, that's ultimately what this is all about, what this order versus truth argument is about, at least when it comes to social psychology, because what does knowing about all the scientific discoveries do to the average human's perception of purpose of life? Truth is taking away the mysteries and adventures of life that makes life worth living. Of course, there's still a lot out there, right? Especially for individuals, this applies. But if you have family, if you have religion, that's great. But that isn't applying to everyone, and is becoming less so as time moves on, as we become more divided, more atomized, more urban. As all of these developments progress, that makes society more depressed, more nihilistic, and just lacking purpose in general. So this was a shorter video, I think. I just wanted to reflect more on the last 2 weeks because I'm, it's been quite a few videos and a lot of content put out. But if you have any comments you'd like me to discuss, anything you want to discuss further, feel free to leave comments, critiques, reviews, or concerns in the comment section, and I'll address them. It's been the Rhetoric Reviewed.